It's me again. It was great to see you this morning on Zoom. It was long. We're going to make some changes to that so it's not as long as it was today. But it was so good to see all your cute faces. We really do miss you. I know I keep saying it, but we do. I've had a wardrobe change. Something I do over here to keep things, interesting. Jeans on jeans. I haven't done this since the 80s. I don't know. I'm kind of digging it. I think it's fine. Chapter 13. Chapter 14. Potentially chapter 15. I may just go on for a while. It's kind of a nice day. And there's some changes about to happen in the book. Okay. Chapter 13. Butter to Ada Maria Smith, to me. I swallowed. I said, if you're joking, it isn't funny. Why would I be joking? Asked Susan. I said, and no one can take him away? No, Susan said, no matter what. I said, what if something happens and I can't take care of him? Susan said, I'll help you. I'm your guardian. We'll manage. What if something happens to you? Nothing will happen to me. She didn't know that. We'll manage, Susan said. We've managed so far. I closed my fingers around the paper. I whispered, thank you. And then I turned and ran up the stairs. Where are you going? Susan yelled. I'm putting this in the box with my birth certificate. Susan had showed me how to look up words in my dictionary. I stayed up in bed that night with my light on, reading. Guardian, one who guards, protects, or preserves. A keeper, defender, sometimes guardian angel. Guardian angel, an angel conceived as watching over or protecting a particular person or place. Angel, a spiritual being believed to act as an attendant, agent, or messenger of God. Conventionally represented in human form with wings and a long robe. Honestly, I had no idea what any of that meant. Guardian was someone who guards. Sure, that made sense. It was what I expected. But humans with wings? Messengers of God? Not so much. Ward. That word was complicated. It meant the rooms of a hospital, like where I'd stayed after my surgery. It meant a division of a city or a town. We have wards in D.C. Ward 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I think 8 wards. It meant the rooms of a hospital, like where I'd stayed after my surgery. It meant a division of a city or a town. It meant a minor under care of a guardian. That was me. But then it said, archaic, to guard. Archaic, belonging to the past. The next morning, I asked Susan, do you know anyone with the guardian angel? She didn't look up from slicing bread. Maybe, she said. It's one of those odd religious ideas. Sounds nice, but doesn't actually matter. I wished she'd look at me. Have you ever seen one? I asked. No, she said. I'd be rather surprised if I did. Set the table, please. Where's Jamie? Once we'd sat down to breakfast, I said, you call Jamie and me your wards. The word ward used to mean the thing that did the guarding. This time, Susan gave me her attention. Have you been reading your dictionary? She asked. I nodded. Well, the key part of what you just said is used to mean. Ward used to mean the thing that did the guarding. Now it means the girl who gets to be guarded and who therefore doesn't have to spend quite so much energy worrying. Jamie said, why can't you just be our mom? I said, because she isn't. Ada, Susan said, I really don't mind Jamie calling me mom. I said, I'd rather be your ward. I want to help you. Susan paused to sip her tea. She said, you've been very strong your whole life, Ada. You get to be guarded now. You get to feel safe. Huh, I said. I'm supposed to feel safe? Of course. I never did, never once. Anything could happen anytime. Ma'am's death proved it. Do you feel safe? I asked her. She looked back in surprise. I do, she said. I mean, for a bit there with the air raids and when we thought the invasion was coming and that night in London, but mostly, yes. But Becky died, I said. She left you all alone. Well, that makes me sad, she said. It still makes me sad, but not unsafe. I said, can I go fire watching? Susan had done a shift already. She'd stood on the church steeple for 2 hours in the dead of the night. She'd watched for fires and protected the village. Susan looked me up and down. And she said, I think that's an excellent idea. Chapter 14. The WVS was pleased to let me help Firewatch, but they said it would take a few weeks to get me onto the rotation. On Saturday, in delight, Susan took Jamie and me up the church steeple so I'd know where to go and what to do. Right inside the church was a small door near the vestibule that I'd never noticed before. Behind it rose a narrow, ancient staircase made of chipped, uneven stone. Remind me to tell you of the time that I went up into this rotunda of an old building, and it was in a country that I couldn't speak their language, and I was trying to get off of this thing, and you couldn't. It's like once you went up, you could never get down. Okay, maybe we'll talk about that later. It's getting me too upset. Susan led, Jamie followed. I went last, slowly and carefully, picking my way. I could never have climbed stairs like these before my surgery. My crutches wouldn't have been able to find steady purchase. I would have fallen for sure. So what do you think the phrase, my crutches wouldn't have been able to find steady purchase, I would have fallen for sure. What do you think, using those words around it, what do you think steady purchase means? We'll talk about it in morning meeting tomorrow. I clutched the handrail, my heart pounded, and my mouth went dry. The stairs opened into a space like a balcony, high up, looking down on the rows of pews. For a moment, the pews swirled dizzily. Pews are the long wooden benches that you see in churches sometimes. I scooted sideways into a room where thick, tied-up ropes hung through holes in the ceiling. This is the bell ringer's room, Susan said. Those ropes ring the church bells. Jamie pretended to pull one of the ropes. Susan frowned. Absolutely not. Since the start of the war, church bells were only to be rung to signal a German invasion. I can picture Jamie doing that. Susan, then Jamie, climbed a wooden ladder, nailed against the wall. I stared at the ladder. I'd never climbed a ladder before. Couldn't with the club foot. Hold on to the sides and use the rungs like stairs, Susan said. I wedged my right foot forward as far as it would go until my toes touched the wall behind the ladder. That brought the weight of the rung under the back of my heel, so climbing didn't hurt so much. It still wasn't easy. But when I looked down, the floor again seemed to swirl. Above the bell ringer's room, 8 bells filled the bottom of the steeple. They were huge, big enough to bathe in. I paused to steady myself. I didn't expect them to be so large. Each bell plays a different note, said Susan. If they're pulled in a certain order, they make music. It's called change ringing. I was a change ringer in my father's parish when I was a girl. Now my hands were shaking. I went up more wooden steps between the bells to a small inward slanting door. Susan opened it. We stepped outside. We were halfway up the steeple, standing on a narrow ledge framed by a waist-high stone wall. I looked over the edge of the wall. The ground was miles away. I had no idea we'd climb so high. The churchyard grass seemed to rise and fall. I could feel myself pitching forward. I shrieked. Susan grabbed my shoulder. Ada, what's wrong? My hands clutched the stone wall. My stomach heaved. You're all right, Susan said. You can't fall. The wall's strong. I'd spent my life looking out Mam's window down 3 stories to the right, to the street. You'd think I'd be used to looking down. Jamie ran from one side of the steeple to the other, squealing in delight. Jamie, I said, get away from the edge. He's fine, Susan said. He can't get hurt. My head rang, and standing in the steeple was as bad as being bombed. Susan said, maybe this isn't a good idea. Let's go back downstairs. No. It's all right to be afraid, Susan said. I gritted my teeth and glared at her. Of course I'm not afraid. The fate of the war does not depend on you fire watching, Susan said. What if it did? Not the big war, but my own. What if my fear kept me safe? We're going to have to pick that apart. What if my fear kept me safe? This is called the war I finally won, not the war England won, or the Allies won. So we'll talk about that. In the meantime, think about what she means. What if my fear kept me safe? The fate of the war does not depend on you fire watching, Susan said. What if it did? Not the big war, but my own. What if my fear kept me safe? Anyway, I am going to fire watch, I said. I stood, locked my knees, and steadied myself against the steeple with one hand. If I looked up instead of down, it wasn't so bad. On one side, hills rose, covered in brown winter grass. On the other, the ocean spread flat and clean. I took a deep breath and filled my lungs with the scent of the ocean. felt the wind on my face. The sky seemed safe, as long as there weren't any bombs. Going down was harder than going up. Going down, to get onto the ladder, I had to swing one foot out into open air. Either I swung my unreliable right foot and hoped it could find the ladder, or I had to trust my weight to the right foot while swinging the left. You don't need to torture yourself, Susan said, watching me. I don't know what you're talking about. I crossed the bell ringer's room and started down the stairs. They were difficult for me, even going slowly. I could never get down them fast. If I started letting myself feel afraid, I would never be able to stop. Outside the church, I stood still for a moment, my feet firm on the ground. I let myself settle. I looked out at the stones in the graveyard. Mam wasn't there. Mam was gone. A sudden thought struck me. Where's Becky's body? I asked Susan. Where is Becky buried? Chapter 15. Well, not here, Susan said. She's buried in the town where she grew up. But her funeral was here, I said, with a sudden flash of memory. Half the village came. Susan furrowed her brow. How do you know that? Lady Thornton said so, I said, ages ago. Most of the village came to the funeral. I hadn't known what a funeral was, but I remembered Lady Thornton saying those words. How odd that you remember. Susan took Jamie's hand and shepherded us down the road. She reached for my hand, but I pretended not to see it. She's not ready for that yet, is she? I remember everything people say about Becky, I said. Why? Asked Susan. I shrugged. She was important. You loved her. She gave you butter. Susan took a deep breath. When she blew out, it made a white cloud in the cold air. She walked faster. After she died, her parents made the decisions, she said. They held her funeral here because she had friends here. Her house had belonged to her grandmother before it belonged to her, so she'd visited the village ever since she was a little girl. But they had her buried in their own churchyard. I suppose they wanted to be able to visit her grave. People often visit their loved ones' graves. You said that before, I said, with Mam, though Mam wasn't exactly a loved one. Yes, Susan said. But you don't visit Becky, I said. No, said Susan, I never have. Do Becky's parents not like you either? Susan's parents didn't like her, and I didn't understand why. Susan sighed. I don't know. I never asked them. Her father certainly never seemed friendly. I asked, is that why you wanted Mam buried here, because you don't get to visit Becky? Jamie asked, if you went to visit Becky's grave, would you feel less sad about her dying? Susan's eyes were watering, but it may have been only the wind. No, she said, and I didn't know which questions she was answering. 2 weeks passed. Maggie returned to school several days later toward the end of January. I was reading in front of the room. 2 weeks passed. Maggie returned to school. Several days later, toward the end of January, I was reading in the front room when someone knocked briskly on the door. I got up and opened it. Lady Thornton blew in on a rush of wind, cold and fierce like the weather. She looked me up and down. Where's your mother? She asked. Dead? I don't, honestly, Ada. I mean, where's Miss Smith? Where's Susan? Yes, of course. Lady Thornton sounded right ticked. Who else could I possibly mean? Susan came in from the kitchen, wiping her hands. Oh, Lady Thornton said. There you are. I've decided to move in with you. Yikes. Chapter 16. Please don't let her, I said to Susan later when we were alone chopping vegetables for dinner. There's no let, Susan said. This is her house. She's letting us stay with her. It's not my decision. The government was kicking Lady Thornton out of Thornton House because they wanted Thornton House with something to do with the war. In wartime, the government could take over whatever they liked. Lady Thornton had 2 weeks to move. Can't she afford to stay somewhere else, somewhere nicer? Of course she can, Susan said. She doesn't want to. Well, I don't see why not. It doesn't matter whether you do, Susan said. But try to imagine how she feels rattling around that huge, empty place. Her husband, children, servants, all gone, most of the rooms shut up. Don't you think she's been terribly lonely? It was hard to imagine Lady Thornton having feelings. She's always busy, I said, and she has that housekeeper. The housekeeper's going to live with their sister, Susan replied. Lady Thornton has friends in the village. Everything she's used to is here, and if she stays with us, she won't have to be alone. I think living with us will be good for her. I thought about it. Does she really have friends? I asked. In the village, I mean? None of the women who rode in the paper chase had been from the village. Yes, Susan said. She has me. For a week, Lady Thornton sorted her furniture and belongings, storing things in the attics of Thornton House or having them moved into our cottage. She took one of the 2 empty bedrooms for herself, but instead of giving Maggie the other, decided that whenever Maggie wasn't at school, she would share my room with me. Lady Thornton took half my bedroom away, and Susan didn't stop her. Lady Thornton moved my things aside and covered them up and changed them, and Susan let her do it. Lady Thornton wanted the last bedroom for what she called a guest room for when Jonathan or someone else came to stay. The whole cottage looked different with Lady Thornton's stuff in it. We had more pots and pans and dishes than we could ever use. We had a different, bigger kitchen table, extra kitchen chairs, a plush sofa, and a fancy wing chair in the sitting room. A radio again, bigger than Susan's old one. A fender for the fire, rugs everywhere, paintings on the walls. The painting above the mantel, Lady Thornton said, was quite good, but it was of dead game birds, and I hated it. A horse painting went into the kitchen. I liked it better. The first night after Lady Thornton finished moving in, we ate dinner together. Susan and I cooked. Lady Thornton sat at the head of the new table in the place Susan usually took. I said, Jonathan doesn't get leave very often. When he does, he can share Jamie's room. Then Maggie could have her own bedroom. Lady Thornton looked at me coolly. She said, I imagine you girls would enjoy sharing. Well, that was true in one way, but in another way, it wasn't. I started to speak again. Across the table, Susan shook her head at me hard. I didn't know why. She never minded me having an opinion, but I closed my mouth. Lady Thornton didn't even clear her own place at the table. She got up and went out. Jamie started carrying the dishes to the sink. Susan waited until the door clicked shut on Lady Thornton, then said, Do you dislike sharing your bedroom with Maggie? I never thought you would. Of course not, I said. I'd share anything I had with Maggie. Well, then what's the matter? I struggled to find words for my feelings. Susan waited. Finally, I said, I'd never mind sharing my room with Maggie, but Lady Thornton's turned it into Maggie's room that she's sharing with me. I paused. I know I'll never be like Maggie. I just never felt this different from her before. Susan raised her eyebrows. Show me. Lady Thornton had put another bed into what had been my room. She'd taken away my dresser, added a glossy wardrobe, and replaced my small bookshelf with a larger one. 2 of its shelves were stuffed full of Maggie's books, while my dictionary lay sideways next to my box on the 3rd. Lady Thornton had emptied a drawer in Maggie's wardrobe for my socks and underwear and pushed Maggie's mass of dresses over to leave room for mine, but as I only had 3 2-day dresses and a new Sunday one, they hardly took up any room. Lady Thornton had spread matching coverlets over both beds and frilly pillows and strange lacy curtains that hung from under the mattresses to the floor. She'd hung ruffled curtains over the window outside the blackout frame. She'd spread a wool rug from Maggie's old room on the floor between the beds and plastered the whole wall above Maggie's bed with framed photographs. Susan said, I see. But you know, before we were bombed, you had a rug and curtains. You had more clothing, too. Well, not like Maggie's clothes, I said. Susan reached into the wardrobe and fingered the fabric of one of Maggie's dresses. Well, not many girls your age have clothes like Margaret Thornton, she said. The Honorable Margaret Thornton, I said. It was Maggie's official title. Not lord or lady, but close enough. That sounds jealous, Susan said. Are you? No, I said, I don't care about Maggie's things, but this doesn't look like my room anymore, and nobody asked me. Nobody asked if I wanted a different coverlet or lace around the bottom of my bed. Nobody asked what I wanted at all. The whole house doesn't look like ours anymore. It looks like it belongs to Lady Thornton. Susan pulled me close and kissed the top of my head. I squirmed away. It does belong to Lady Thornton, she said. I know you don't want to hear that, but it's true. She should have asked, I said. I agree, said Susan. With your room, she should have. I'm glad for the new kitchen things and a more comfortable sitting room, but I wouldn't have wanted Lady Thornton rearranging my bedroom either. I never had my own space before. Susan nodded. It was important to you. Well, I didn't realize it, I said, but it was. I leaned into her a little bit. Would you rather share my room? Susan asked. I'd give you half the space and you could keep it however you wished. I considered it. Lady Thornton wouldn't like that. Doesn't matter, Susan said. I'll handle it with her if that's what you want. I thought some more. I don't know, I said. Let me wait and see how it is when Maggie's here. I loved being around Maggie. It was Lady Thornton I felt anxious about. That's fine, Susan said. Meanwhile, you can do anything to your side of the room that you want. Change it back as much as you like. Just leave Maggie's belongings alone and keep your door shut. What Lady Thornton doesn't see, she can't grieve over. It was odd to have Lady Thornton inside her house at night. She took her bath right after supper, then sat downstairs in her dressing gown. Lady Thornton wearing a dressing gown. I couldn't help but stare. She sat in the big wing chair, slippered feet on a needlework footstool, silently reading. I watched her turn the pages. Ada, please, she said, looking up. I am not an exhibit in a zoo. I looked at the wall. Jamie said, What's a zoo? Lady Thornton raised her eyebrows. Susan replied calmly, It's a park where they have all sorts of unusual animals in cages and people pay money to go look at them. There's a big zoo in London. Like a freak show? Said Jamie. Who knew where he'd heard that? Not especially, Lady Thornton said. What sort of animals? I asked. All sorts, Susan said. Ones you read about in books. Monkeys, zebras, lions. I am not a monkey, said Lady Thornton. Throw peanuts at me and I will not respond. This didn't make sense to me, but Lady Thornton and Susan smiled. The very next morning, Lord Thornton came home. He pulled up to our cottage in an automobile, and when he held open its door, I forgot about this part. A girl, a few years older than me, climbed out. She had dark hair and pale skin and an expression like Jamie's cat, self-contained and wary. Susan and Lady Thornton came out. Hello, ladies, Lord Thornton said, taking a suitcase from the back seat of the car. Hello, Ada. He put his hand on the girl's shoulder and propelled her forward a step. Susan, I brought you the project I promised. Her name is Ruth. I stared at Ruth. She stared back. Indignant, whether at me or at being called a project, I didn't know. She's 16, Lord Thornton said. She's preparing for her Oxford entrance exams, and you're going to be paid to tutor her in maths. I have a list of topics she needs to thoroughly understand. He cleared his throat and added, Her father is a statistician from Dresden. Susan jerked, startled. Lady Thornton froze. I didn't know why. I didn't know what statistician meant. Ruth dropped her gaze to the ground. Her shoulders tightened. Her cheeks turned red. Unbelievable. Lady Thornton sounded outraged. I will not have a German in this house. Dresden is in Germany. Who do you think she is? Okay. I like this author. Okay, that's all for today. We will keep talking about this. We have this much more. Okay? Because I'm totally calm now and not talking as much, I can read more. Okay, we'll see you tomorrow morning meeting, and I hope you enjoyed today, and we will talk soon.